Coming up on The World Today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu falls short of majority amid vote count. EU plans for tougher controls on vaccine exports. Plus, Egypt's Suez Canal blocked by huge container ship. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's prospects for retaining power in Israel are looking uncertain after exit polls in the country's fourth parliamentary election in 2 years projects yet another deadlock. With almost 90% of votes counted, his right-wing bloc is on course to win 59 seats, too short of the threshold. In a surprise development, an Arab party, which is projected to get 5 seats, could hold the balance of power. The final outcome will, among other things, determine the course of Israel's relations with the Palestinians.
Israelis woke up to vagueness on Wednesday as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's prospect for retaining power looks uncertain after partial election results projected no clear path to victory. With about 88% of votes counted, it appears that Netanyahu, leader of the right-wing Likud, will have to couple together an unlikely coalition that might include Jewish ultra-Orthodox, ultra-nationalist and Arab parties to secure another term. Tuesday's votes follow 3 other inconclusive elections in which neither 71-year-old Netanyahu nor his center-left opponent won a majority in the 120-seat parliament.
If the final outcome will still indicate that we are within a deadlock situation, a 5th round of election is for sure an option, but it's not necessarily the only outcome of the election. There are still a few other scenarios of minority government, either a minority government led by Netanyahu, a minority government led by a change coalition, or a government that will depend on some kind of a combination of defectors.
On social media, Prime Minister Netanyahu claimed a huge victory over groups trying to unseat him, though he did not repeat the claim in an election night speech at a Likud rally. He simply stated that its projected number of seats is a great achievement and that he hopes to form a stable right-wing government.
Because the country needs a stable government, not a government of tatters based on personal rejections and ambitions. A stable government for Israel. This is what the time requires. This is what the challenges we are facing requires. And we must not drag the state of Israel to a new election, to a 5th election. Establish a stable government now.
Mr. Netanyahu had campaigned on his leadership credentials based on a war-beating COVID-19 vaccination rollout that has enabled nearly 50% of Israelis to receive 2 vaccine shots already. But charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust, which the Prime Minister denied in an ongoing corruption trial, as well as economic hardship during 3 nationwide coronavirus lockdowns, have weighed on his popularity.
The VOA's Linda Gradstein is in Jerusalem, from where she joins us. Linda, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
So 90% of the votes have now been counted, and exit polls say Prime Minister Netanyahu could still struggle to secure enough seats in Parliament. Does this mean there will be no 5th round of election?
Well, basically, we don't know yet. And that's because there are about 450,000 votes, which are called double envelopes. The double envelopes, meaning the votes were put in 2 separate envelopes, are for anybody who does not vote in their place close to their home. So, for example, Israeli soldiers or coronavirus patients in the hospitals, or diplomats who are stationed abroad. So we won't know until those votes are counted, and that's probably Friday. But the way it looks now is that nobody can actually form a majority coalition of 61. That said, we're just at the beginning of this process. It's going to be several weeks of kind of political horse trading, and Netanyahu's Likud party is still the largest political party, significantly more than any other party. I think there's a sense that Israelis don't want a fifth election. Elections are very expensive. They're really a waste of time and energy. And so I think that they're all different kinds of scenarios, and it's just too early to see what will happen. Netanyahu, of course, is hoping that those double envelopes will give him what he needs to get over to the magic number of 61, which is the one-seat majority in the 120-seat Knesset.
Linda, you know, the election is also a sort of referendum of how Netanyahu's government has performed in the pandemic, with curbing the spread of the virus, with vaccinations. And we know there is some criticism there, though. But in general, are Israelis satisfied with the fact that, you know, more than half of the population has been vaccinated so far, and full reopening of the economy could come sooner?
Yes, I mean, the truth is that there were certain mistakes made. For example, that Israel did not close the airport until the end of January, and so people were kind of coming and going freely. That said, the fact that 80% of adults have been vaccinated, and another 15% of Israelis have recovered from COVID. So Israel is apparently well on its way to herd immunity. So I think the country has really opened up. I mean, you feel the difference in the last 2 weeks. Gyms are open, restaurants are open, stores are open. So I think that that really worked in Netanyahu's favor, in that people said between the vaccine rollout, which Israel's vaccine rollout has been incredibly successful, and partly because Israel has a system in place of everybody has a private doctor, everybody has an HMO, a health maintenance organization, and so they set it up quickly. It was done incredibly efficiently. So 80% of adults have 2 vaccines, and so we're more or less immune to COVID-19. So I think that also played in Netanyahu's favor, and the sense that everything opened up, and it's almost as if Corona never happened. The other thing is that Israel's a socialist country, so everybody who was unemployed has been receiving unemployment payments of 70% of their salary. So you don't have the same kinds of difficulties that you might have, for example, in the United States and other places. That said, a lot of businesses have closed, and it's been very difficult economically. But I think overall there's a sense that Israel handled certainly the vaccines, and Netanyahu specifically, very well.
And then let's just focus back on the election exercise very quickly. Talk to us about the opposition in this election. The main person now is Yair Lapid. How is he reacting to these latest developments, and what are his chances in this election?
Well, his chances are basically zero. You know, he's well behind Netanyahu. Yair Lapid is a sort of centrist television personality. He did well. His party is relatively new, and he did well in the elections, but there does not seem to be a way. Netanyahu is going to have a hard time forming a coalition. It seems to me impossible that the opposition to Netanyahu, which runs the gamut from the far left to the far right, would be able to unite enough to form a coalition. So it does not seem likely. What seems most likely is either a Netanyahu coalition, perhaps some kind of centrist coalition like we had last time, or another election.
All right then, Linda, exciting times ahead. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed.
Thank you.
So our coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic now, the European Commission has proposed tougher controls on vaccine exports after it accused UK-Swedish firm AstraZeneca of failing to honour its contract to supply EU countries. The plans to go before EU leaders on Thursday stop short of a ban but could inflame tensions with the UK. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update.
Take your questions. Let me remind you that today we have...
European Health Commissioner Stella Kyriakides says the pandemic is getting worse in many European countries, with the number of COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations and deaths on the rise. In response, the Commission says it is tightening rules for exports of COVID-19 vaccines made in the EU.
The revision of the export transparency mechanism really does come at a time with the situation remaining alarming in many member states. We are starting to see more and more concerning circumstances. This is evidenced by the fact that 19 countries are now reporting increasing case numbers. 15 member states are reporting increased hospital and ICU admissions, while 8 member states are now reporting increased number of deaths.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ditched a plan agreed on Tuesday for an extended Easter lockdown to try to break a third wave of the coronavirus pandemic. She apologized to lockdown-weary Germans after the hastily conceived plan triggered a huge backlash.
Just to be absolutely clear, the idea of an Easter shutdown was created with the best of intentions, as we urgently need to stop this third wave of the pandemic and find a way to reverse it. Nonetheless, the idea of a stricter Easter shutdown was a mistake. They were good reasons, but was not doable in such a short time. It's not clear whether even if we had had time, it would have justified the time and effort to enforce it.
Ms. Merkel's comments come against a backdrop of growing public frustration with the Conservative-led government over the slow rollout of COVID-19 vaccines and extended lockdown measures. In Russia, the government says President Vladimir Putin has set a good example to Russians by getting vaccinated against COVID-19 and that it will get the second of a 2-shot vaccine in around 3 weeks. The Kremlin says Mr. Putin had his first shot on Tuesday, but declined to say which of Russia's 3 vaccines he received. It also released no photographs or video footage of him getting the shot. In Asia, Hong Kong authorities halted the use of a COVID-19 vaccine developed by Pfizer and BioNTech as a precaution due to defective packaging, triggering scenes of confusion in inoculation centers across the city.
Just waiting around now. Just lack of communication from anybody, whether on the news or people in there. Just waiting for. I've got nothing else to do right now, so I'm just going to wait for a little bit and see what happens.
The government later issued a press release clarifying that the vaccine will be put on hold pending an investigation into possible packaging defects related to the closure of bottles. The suspension comes as the Asian financial hub has faced a slow take-up of vaccines due to dwindling confidence in China's Sinovac biotech vaccine and fears of adverse reactions.
To other stories now, the UK Home Secretary has set out what she calls a fair but firm overhaul to the way people applying for asylum in the country are treated. Priti Patel says for the first time, people seeking protection as refugees would have their claim assessed based on how they arrive in the UK. She adds that ministers would crack down on people smugglers because enough is enough. Labour says the plans lack compassion and competence.
Our new system will be faster and fairer and will help us better support the most vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, our new plan builds on the work already done to take back control of our borders, building a system that upholds our reputation as a country where criminality is not rewarded. First, we will continue to provide safe refuge to those in need, strengthening support for those arriving through safe and legal routes. People coming to the UK through resettlement routes will be granted indefinite leave to remain. They will receive more support to learn English, find work and integrate. For the first time, whether people enter the UK legally or illegally will have an impact on how their asylum claim progresses and on their status in the UK if that claim is successful. We will deem their claim as inadmissible and make every effort to remove those who enter the UK legally, having travelled through a safe country first, in which they could and should have claimed asylum.
Still to come on the programme. We get up close to erupting volcano crater in Iceland through drone footage. Thanks for staying with us on the programme. It's up to China to make good on its promises to the EU to open up its economy to the 27-member bloc. That's coming from the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, after a meeting of NATO foreign ministers. Blinken also reiterated the U.S. position that the construction of a gas pipeline between Russia and Germany was a bad idea, and warned that sanctions against companies involved with the project were a real possibility.
On investment. Our judgment is that the onus is really going to be on China to demonstrate that the pledges it's made on forced labor, on state-owned enterprises, on subsidies are not just talk, and that the Chinese government will follow through on the commitments that it's made. So I suspect that not only will we be looking to that, but so will the European Union. But we'll also continue to engage with...
Now, a giant container ship the length of 4 football pitches has become wedged across Egypt's Suez Canal, blocking traffic in one of the world's busiest trade routes. Dozens of vessels are stuck, waiting for rescue boats to free the 400-meter-long ship, which was knocked off course by strong winds. Egypt has reopened the canal's older channel to divert some traffic until the grounded ship can move again, but the mishap has created long tailbacks. About 12% of global trade passes through the Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean to the Red Sea and provides the shortest sea link between Asia and Europe. Myanmar's military leaders have freed hundreds of demonstrators arrested during its brutal crackdown on protests. Several buses full of prisoners were seen driving out of Yangon's Isian jail in the morning. The Assistance Association for Political Prisoners activist group says at least 2,000 people have been arrested in the military crackdown on the protest against the February the 1st coup. Meanwhile, many businesses in Yangon remain shut and streets are deserted after anti-coup activists called for a silent strike. As the world marks World Tuberculosis Day, the World Health Organization says an estimated 1.4 million fewer people received care for the disease in 2020 than in 2019. According to preliminary data compiled by the WHO from over 80 countries, a reduction of 21% from 2019. The countries with the biggest relative gaps are Indonesia, that's 42%, South Africa, 41%, the Philippines, 37%, and India, 25%. In 2020, WHO fears that over 500,000 more people may have died from TB simply because they were unable to obtain a diagnosis, partly because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been severe, with an additional 1.4 million people estimated to be missing out on access to care in 2020. This takes the total of those who would have missed out on access to TB care in 2020 to over 4 million. Furthermore, an estimated 500,000 excess TB deaths could result due to drops in notifications, setting the world back a decade to the level of TB mortality in 2010. We need to build back stronger, learning lessons from the COVID-19 response to ensure more resilient health systems are in place and to advocate for rapid innovations such as vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics. TB vaccine is 100 years old. We can learn from the COVID response to ensure more effective vaccines that can truly drive down the epidemic. We have just 600 days to go to reach the 2022 global TB targets and keep the promises made at the UN high-level meeting on TB.
Now, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has toured flood-affected parts of Sydney on an Australian Defence Force helicopter. The Prime Minister says it's devastating to see the damage. Wild weather systems have drenched the country's east, prompting tens of thousands of evacuations, especially in the hardest-hit state of New South Wales, where dams continue to overflow and rivers bulge.
Expanse of water that went right across that region was quite devastating to see, and to see the homes, only their roofs and those of out sheds and things like that for the producers in that area. It was very clear that when these waters subside, and they will, albeit it's happening all too slowly, because as we went past Warragamba Dam, we could see the water continuing to surge out of that dam, Mr. Speaker, and it will be some time before those waters recede.
And finally on the programme, let's get up close and personal with Iceland's volcano eruption in the capital. Drone footage has captured close shots of lava bubbling in the crater of the volcano, which erupted last Friday. The video shows lava pouring from the crater down the side of the volcano and into a lava field. The drone operator braved the snow and biked 7 kilometers to the volcano, which is not accessible by road. The trip through hilly terrain took approximately 1.5 hours and allowed him to film lava gurgling out of the crater on a snowy day. The eruption followed thousands of small earthquakes in recent weeks and was the first on the peninsula since the 12th century. The source of the eruption is a large body of molten rock known as magma, which has pushed its way towards the surface over the past few weeks, instigating the earthquakes. Since the eruption, which the Icelandic Meteorological Office classified as small, scientists, rescue personnel, photographers and onlookers have flocked to the area. That's what you call beautiful but deadly. And that's the world today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shuboale.